If you're excited to play Last Epoch 1.0, but you need a build to get started, then you've come to the right place. For me personally, I find that picking my build is the hardest part of a league or season start, and I'm sure it's going to be the same for future cycles. And so today, I'm going to give my top 10 favorite Last Epoch build picks, along with some things that I think support a variety of playstyles. Some of them are very strong, some of them go fast. Basically, there's something for everyone. And also towards the end, I'm going to be speaking with the leveling expert himself, Terek, about some of these builds and leveling in Last Epoch in general. So if you need some tips and tricks, do be sure to stick around until the end. That said, before I get into things, I'd like to take a minute to thank this video's sponsor, 11th Hour Games, for helping to provide the community with high-quality resources. More about that at the end, but in short, all they want is that you check out Last Epoch on the 21st. As a quick disclaimer, some of the footage I've gathered is really just to show what the skill looks like, and is not going to give you an accurate representation of what it's like to play the build either as a starter or in the endgame. First up, there might be a hot new build in your area, and it's absolutely Falconer. While I was looking at the Falconer preview, I read the words Dexterity and more, and then found my build. Scaling your Falcon off of Dexterity leads to an extremely easy path to get your damage. Then, you can use your Explosive Trap to summon Ballistae, which explode, also scaling off of Dexterity for even more damage. Later on, not only do you have screen-wide explosions, but you also have Dive Bomb, which completely annihilates single target. In fact, I'm pretty sure with the right setup, you can pretty much one-shot a boss before boss DR even kicks in. Because most of your early damage comes from Dexterity, it's really easy to gear, without really requiring any rare affixes, unique items, etc. I suspect this is going to be one of the smoothest leveling experiences on the list, and personally, I did have a lot of fun with it when I tried it as part of my 1.0 preview. Feel free to watch that after this if you want to see more of the gameplay. And after I played on Cycle Start, I'm going to be making a full guide video going over all of my choices, so do be sure to get subscribed for that, and hey, maybe leave a like while you're down there. Now I know with patch notes and the EHG post on Reddit, there were some concerns about nerfs to the build, especially Dive Bomb. All I can say is, don't worry. I didn't have an Exalted Bow, and I didn't have a Morning Frost, yet I was still critting in the millions. And yes, that's without taking the stun nodes. I felt like I always had a button to do what I wanted. If I needed more AoE, then I could drop a couple of traps, they'll explode a few seconds later. If I needed more immediate damage, I could either use Falcon Strikes or Dive Bomb, depending on which was off cooldown. Now, Falcon Strikes does eat away at your mana, so you want to be careful using this on single target. When clearing and moving quickly through an echo, it's no problem at all. I found the playstyle was fast, fluid, everything that I would expect from a rogue build, on top of having incredible damage. Now, I didn't pay the closest attention to my defenses, but I think if you pay a little more attention, it'll feel super tanky as well. Maybe not quite face tank, but you will certainly be able to take a couple of hits. Speaking of, the next build I want to talk about is Bleed Warlock or Wardlock, because Warlock actually has insane defenses. And I also heard you like triggers, so I'm going to give you some triggers with your triggers. You cast Chthonic Fissure to trigger Chaos Bolts, which then trigger other skills that stack a massive number of bleeds on your enemies. Now as a note, my experience was with a Torment-based Necrotic Dot Warlock rather than the Bleed version, but I'm pretty sure when leveling the Bleed version would be far stronger. On Necrodot, my experience was that the Fissures aggressively fired spirits at enemies, inflicting torment and overall dealing a lot of damage, but I was still reliant on all of my other Necrodot skills, whereas with Bleed, because your Chaos Bolts are triggering everything everywhere all at once, it almost becomes a one-button build. This build is insane for leveling, because Bleed has base damage in Last Epoch, which basically means the more times you hit something, the more damage you do. And also, since there's a lot of ways to gain ward by hitting things, the more times you hit something, the more ward you gain, making for very tanky, low-life endgame options once you have done a little bit of farming. Next up, I'm going back to my roots to talk about one of the first builds I played in Last Epoch, sort of. I'm talking about the good old Shift Cascade, except the Shadow Daggers version with Umbral Blades. Now, if you read the patch notes, you would have seen that yes, Shadow Daggers did receive a nerf, but don't worry, much like many of the powerful skills in Path of Exile, its demise is very premature. It's in fact still going to be an excellent build, because at the end of the day, you'll have more than enough damage when you need it, and, better yet, you'll be able to go super fast. The playstyle is simple. Press the shift button. If you need more single target, that's what Synchronized Strike is for. You'll shoot out plenty of Umbral Blades that fire Shadow Daggers that automatically crit enemies, dealing massive amounts of damage. This is an extremely fast and fun playstyle, so if you liked playing bow builds in Path of Exile, this is 100% the build for you. Also, if you happen to be feeling spicy and want a new way to play, consider going Falconer instead of Blade Dancer. There's a lot of synergies there, but I haven't explored it too much myself. Next up we have Hydrahedron, another build that's still going to be strong in 1.0. Apologies for the footage here, It's very, very scuffed, but hopefully at least you can see a visual of the Hydrahedron rune firing out at enemies. Now, there's several ways to accomplish this. One can be ordering your skills on the bar. This puts a cooldown on your runic invocation. Another can be using Rune Bolt. Using Rune Bolt is a little bit problematic because then you have to use things in the correct order. In this case, lightning, fire, fire. Another way would just be manually casting lightning, fire, fire via different skills. Now, the big advantage of using something like Hydrahedron is it's essentially a sentry turret that fires at enemies automatically. So if you're a new player, all you really have to do is dodge boss mechanics while focusing on your rotation. The downside of using something like Hydrahedron, though, is it's a little bit more complex to set up and play than many of the other builds on this list. So for most people going into this, I would recommend that you follow a guide, at least until you feel a little bit more comfortable with the game. That said, if you're a returning Les Epoch veteran, go ahead, dive in. Runemaster is really, really fun. One of the coolest things about Runemaster is the runic invocations. You have 3 different runes, fire, cold, lightning. You gain them by, well, using an associated skill. Then you fire off your runic invocation. The effects depend on which runes you used. Just remember, lightning, fire, fire, because not only does the type matter, but the position as well. So lightning, fire, fire is different from fire, lightning, fire. It's also different from fire, fire, lightning. So if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to experiment with other styles of runic invocation build, as there's quite a lot of them out there. Next up, we have Nova Hammerdin. I really like recommending this one to beginners because Paladin gives you a lot of passive defenses. You have a ton of resistances, so you don't need that much gear. And with Enra's technique, your hammers do a lot of damage. Plus, when you have mana-starved forging, you can't run out of hammers or run out of mana and stop throwing hammers, which means it's a very beginner-friendly. Also, it's an iconic D2 Hammerdin, so if you like that, you very well might like this. With the recent addition of a skill tree for the Paladin's healing hands, this build is better than ever. Now early on, you may want to level as Holy Trail, that's also very easy to play, more on that in a second. However, if you're looking for a smooth and fast farming build, Nova Hammerdin is absolutely excellent. And you can always swap it into something else like Smite Hammerdin if you want more damage later. On the other hand, if you don't want to be a Hammerdin, you could also just be a Holy Trail Paladin. You can think of this build as being less of a walking nuke and more of a precision bomber. It's highly effective at killing things in a very localized area. Like I said, free res means you get to stack life and armor on your items, fixing the early game defenses without an issue. The Healing Hand skill tree now gives you ward, and that's even stronger for something like Holy Trail. Also, Holy Trail heals you while still dealing damage to enemies. The playstyle can be a little bit of an acquired taste. Nova Hammerdin hits pretty much everything around it. Holy Trail hits everything in a very specific line. Luckily, because there's a lot of objective rushing in Last Epoch, you don't necessarily have to worry about killing every monster in your monolith. Instead, you worry about killing the very specific monsters near the objective and large packs that you happen to hit along the way. Just remember, if you're going to be playing Holy Trail, you'll want to stack up healing effectiveness because that does buff your damage, and also, do be sure to stand in the trail for additional healing. This is one of the best builds a beginner can play if they want to face tank a lot of mechanics while learning the game. Also, fair warning, it may ruin your experience because you'll get used to face tanking and you won't be able to do that on your next build. Next up we have Flame Wraith Necromancer, a build that I have not played and honestly I probably wouldn't enjoy, but I have heard really good things about it from people who enjoy minions. Start with Skeletal Mages, at least until you farm up some idols, then you can reroll into Flame Wraith, and it's a top tier minion build once you get there. In comparison to a lot of the other builds on the list, this one is a little bit harder to start because you do need the idols. Luckily with Circle of Fortune, idols are relatively easy to get now. Just target farm them using idol echoes. These minions strike the balance between something that's super tanky but really annoying to micromanage, and something that's really easy to micromanage, you fire and forget, but you have to constantly replace it. There's a little bit of give and take here. This very much feels like the middle ground minion build that isn't really a compromise. Also, big thanks to Dreadful for providing the gameplay footage here, because I don't have a minion build and I don't even have a Necromancer that I could quickly respec to make a scuffed showcase. So big props to him. He said he might be making a Flame Wraith video. I'll try to remember to link it down below if he does. If not, just go check out his channel. Next up we have the melee classic, Spin to Win, aka Warpath Void Knight. And if you're wondering, wait, why are you including this? I'm including it because I have to. Spin to Win is such an iconic playstyle in ARPGs that if I don't, I know people are going to play it anyway. And if you play it anyway, you might have a bad time. And since you're going to do it anyway, I'm going to give you the best chance possible to succeed. Be warned though, the early campaign for this build is very rough. Just level as Holy Trail instead. Swap over once you're able to get Dark Stride and Apathy's Maw, 2 unique items which you're able to farm relatively easily in the endgame. Once you get it going, it is a very fast build, quite fun and awesome for clearing. You hold down one button. That's right, it is one of a few builds in Last Epoch that is an actual one-button playstyle, in addition to being tanky enough that you don't have to pay attention to most enemy mechanics, at least outside of boss telegraphs. See, I told you, it's worth the wait. This is very much the sort of build that starts out rough, but gets good later. Personally, I ended up playing it just to try it out a little bit. My gear was scuffed, and it wasn't really a problem. Now, I wasn't pushing super high corruption. However, what I did like is, again, I could just hold down one button and blast through. Sometimes I'd want to shield rush a little bit, and yes, you can shield rush with a two-handed weapon, because Last Epoch's just awesome like that. And so for all you spin to win enjoyers out there, congratulations, you got your entry on the list. Next up we have Druid Swarmblade, or Icebug, a build whose main defensive mechanic is freezing enemies solid, preventing them from moving or acting. Yeah, as it turns out, this build has absolutely incredible defenses. Your main mechanism of damage is applying Frostbite, a really interesting cold damage over time effect. It's basically chill if chill could kill. And yes, you stack it with chill, you stack it with freeze rate multiplier, and you get all sorts of really fun crowd control effects, while also doing a lot of damage. Personally, I haven't actually played any Primalist builds, but if I do play a Primalist in 1.0, and trust me, there's pretty good odds that I'm going to, this is definitely on my list of builds to try, because Swarmblade looks really fun actually. I'm not the biggest fan of melee builds, oftentimes the movement feels clunky. Looks like here you're just kinda zooming, zipping, slashing everything that you come across, and hey, you even have a tornado surrounding you. Who doesn't want to be surrounded by a tornado? In some ways, this almost feels like Cold Werebear, but way better than Cold Werebear. Admittedly, I know that's not quite the same, because in this case you're a bug and that's a bear, but I'm going to go with it. Last but not least, more proof that I really need to play a Primalist, because Thorn Totem Shaman is very good. Oh, and it can be played on a Druid as well. The totems heal you, which means, much like a Paladin, you get a very high baseline life recovery. The damage is good, and it scales really well into the endgame. You won't have those huge damage spikes that some builds get after unlocking a key talent node, but you also won't have those huge valleys that some builds get before unlocking key nodes or before getting a certain item. It's a pretty smooth baseline that just goes up as you continue progressing. As a result, it's one of the easiest starters to play, and also you get resistances for free, which means you can use the suffixes on your gear for things like endurance, life, and armor. Now, it is a little slower than some of the other picks, but it more than makes up for that with massive defenses. If you don't mind going a little slower, but you definitely don't like dying, or maybe you're playing in hardcore, I can absolutely recommend either Thorn Totem Shaman or Thorn Totem Druid. And so those are my picks for the 10 best cycle starters in Last Epoch 1.0. I tried to include a little bit of something for everyone, so hopefully everyone finds one build. As a result, this is a wide variety of playstyles, a mix of very fast builds that can be a little squishier, or a little slower, but very tanky builds, things with good recovery, and things that are both high and low APM. So now, before I wrap things up, I wanted to share this quick interview that I did with Terek. If you're familiar with Maxwell's leveling guides, yep, he wrote them. He's very good at leveling in Last Epoch and good at the game in general. As a note, there isn't video for this interview, so enjoy the gameplay footage of various endgame activities along with a little bit of me failing at the campaign. Now, I'm not an expert at Last Epoch, so I brought in Terek, which if you know anything about leveling or going fast, he literally wrote the book. And now I want to know, what are some of Terek's recommendations for builds that a new player can level and have a good time? The floor is yours.
So the first one is going to be Bleed Warlock. It's a super tanky build and also has a lot of quality of life because you're going to use a skill called Tonic Fissure, and it's going to proc a bunch of skill from that one skill. And so when you clear, you basically just throw your Tonic Fissure and it kills everything around it.
Yeah, I played a little bit of Torment Warlock, and just throwing down a Fissure and watching it clear behind me was great. Only downside, sometimes it was hard to go back to pick up the loot.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem of builds that are too fast. Kinda.
I guess it's a good problem to have.
Yeah. The second one is going to be Thorn Totem that you can play as Shaman or Druid. The reason why is because this build is very well rounded. It has great damage, great defense and recovery because of the healing of the totem, and also because you have a lot of free res that you get from the passive tree. And so this build is like one of the best for leveling.
I haven't actually played a Shaman or any Primalist at all, but I did play Paladin. Would you say the experience is kind of similar?
Yeah, it's kind of similar for new players, having like a lot of free res and a lot of healing. Those are both great in that regard.
I remember the best thing about Paladin was even when I forgot to pick up pretty much any items for 3 chapters, my resistances were still capped.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, actually. The third one is going to be Shadow Dagger that you can play with any mastery on Rogue. It is one of the fastest build for leveling and also has an insane damage spike as soon as you get level 27 and get increased daggers. And this build is, like I said, one of the fastest, if not the fastest build for leveling because of shift. Basically, whenever you shift, you're going to leave behind an Umbral Blade. And that Umbral Blade is like spinning and it's going to apply Shadow Dagger, basically killing everything behind you. So the gameplay is shift, 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 shift until you get to the boss. And then you're going to use Sync Strike and it's going to kill him in like 1 second.
Yeah, I remember my first build when I tried last Epoch was a terrible bleed detonating arrow character. That didn't go very well. And so I rerolled to a shift Shadow Cascade build. I don't remember if Shadow Daggers was a thing back then or if I just didn't know how it worked. Either way, just pressing shift over and over, super smooth. It was possibly to this day the fastest build I've played.
Okay, last build I want to talk about is going to be Falconeer, one of the new mastery. It has an insane damage scaling, and you're gonna start with Explosive Trap by using a bow. It's gonna buff your Falcon, and then you're gonna use your Falcon ability at the same time. And basically, you're gonna clear the whole screen, one-shotting everything. And once you unlock Dive Bomb, it's where it gets crazy because Dive Bomb's damage scaling is insane. Like you're gonna like kill timeline bosses in like 2 or 3 seconds. And for the clear, we also proc from Explosive Trap. We're going to proc ballistas that explode. And it's going to cover like the whole screen every time it explodes, one-shotting also everything. So this build is like absolutely crazy damage.
I felt like it was a mistake when I saw more damage per dexterity and more damage per level in Falconry. But then I realized there's also 8% more damage per dexterity in Ballista. And yeah, I did not get to one-shot anything, but I was coming very close when I played it for a little bit as part of my preview of 1.0. The damage is absolutely insane, and I think if you want to play Falconer, you will have a good time. One thing, though, that I know a lot of people coming in, you might have played Path of Exile, Torchlight Infinite, Diablo 4, might have questions on is, what are some sticking points in the campaign? When does it get hard? And why does Ten keep saying that you should craft early and often when you're playing Last Epoch? So, Terek, why do people craft so much?
So this game has a concept around items where you basically drop the items half done and you have to craft to finish the items. And on each item, you're going to have like forging potential, and you kind of want to craft until you have 0 forging potential on the item that you actually want to use. And this is a concept that you also find in endgame. It's not only for the leveling. And on the side, what you can also do is pick up items where you want to extract the affixes. And so you're going to use runes of shattering and runes of removal on those to also craft on the items that you want to use, basically.
Yeah, and something that threw me for a loop when I first started playing is I'd look for good affixes. So like, oh, this is a T20 item, so it must be good. I've since learned there's other things that can be more valuable, and especially at low levels, implicits often outweigh affixes. Why is that?
So implicit have high values in this game. Like the range at which they scale is pretty high compared to a game, for example, like PoE. And so you might find items that have a lot of affixes on them, but the implicit is not really good. And those items could be worse than an item with very few affixes, but a really good implicit, especially early on, which is the reason why I recommend actually buying at the shop very often early on to get like more reliable source of power from those implicit items.
That's something I need to do more often when I level. I definitely haven't done that enough. Now, one big thing in Path of Exile is you need certain resistances by certain acts. In Act 1, if you can get a Sapphire Ring before you get to Mervale, that's really, really strong. Is there anything like that in Last Epoch? And if so, what resistances should people prioritize?
So in Last Epoch, you have the similar concept, but it doesn't happen in the first chapter. It starts, I would say, at chapter 2, where for chapter 2 and 3, you're going to have like a lot of void monsters. And so you want void resistance for those chapters. Then for chapter 4, that's where they're going to introduce necrotic monsters, so necrotic res. And then it's going to be physical res for chapter 5 and 6. Cold res for chapter 7. You add to that lightning res, so cold and lightning for chapter 8. And finally, you will also want to add poison res for chapter 9.
I see. So you're building up your resistances as you go through. And would you say that defenses are a really big part of a campaign in Last Epoch?
Yeah, I would say so. It's even there's like a subtlety to it, because there are chapters where you don't need all the resistance that you previously built. For example, void resistance, you might only need it for chapter 2 and 3, and then you can swap to other resistance as you progress through the chapters.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about damage then? Are you constantly upgrading weapons? Do you mostly get it from skill levels? How does that go?
So early on, damage is mostly going to come from your weapons, but as you progress, the passive tree and the skill tree are going to have like a lot more importance on your damage scaling. Early on, though, you really want to focus on damage instead of defense or an hybrid like defense damage. That way, you're going to have like a higher chance to survive. It's not like in PoE where you kind of want like cold resistance for the first act. Here, you have so much density that actually having higher damage is going to improve your survivability. And then you have also dots early on that are very valuable because of their base damage being kind of high. And so any chance to apply dots on your weapon or ignite on your amulet is going to be very valuable.
Yeah, that's something that I haven't done enough while leveling, is just throw dots on, even though that's not something my build is scaling.
Yeah, that's something that you want to do no matter the build.
All right, and what about the campaign as a whole? Do people go through? Can you skip stuff? What's that like?
Yeah, Ellie is kind of special in that regard, where you have access to the endgame after chapter 2. And so you also have a lot of side quests that gives you idle slots and passives. But the game gives you more than what you need. So you actually have to choose which quest you want to do. And so you have like different routes depending on where you want to stop in the campaign. For example, you can do the full campaign to get your faction at the release. You can also stop at chapter 7. That's the earliest where you can get like all your passive and idle slots. And you also have a route where you stop at chapter 5. And that's probably like the earliest that you would ever go into endgame.
Yeah, that was definitely something that when I first started, I didn't really do properly. I thought, oh, you have to go all the way through a campaign and you get to Lagan, and it's terrible. But yeah, you can just stop partway through as long as you've got everything that you need. Is there anything else about the campaign that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, just to complement what we said, you can also skip the campaign with dungeons. And so even though we stop at chapter 5 or chapter 7, for example, doesn't mean that we have to do chapter 8 and then 9. You're going to drop keys for dungeons. And the reason why we stop at chapter 5 actually is because that's the earliest when we can unlock the access to the Temporal Sanctum. And that dungeon allows you to skip to chapter 9 directly. So actually, as you push into the endgame system, you're going to drop a Temporal Sanctum key and you could skip to the chapter 9 directly. So this is very efficient if you want to be fast, but it's also going to depend on your build, your knowledge of the game, because the sooner you go into the end game, the harder it will be. I heard there's going to be like a lot of density with the new timelines.
Sounds scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing, because I'm sure the comments are going to be full of it, loot filters. What are your thoughts on loot filters while leveling?
Okay, for new players, I recommend, if you want to make one, make a very simple one to avoid mistakes, because I'm talking from experience, like doing so many loot filters for my speedruns. I made so many mistakes, even though they were very simple. So try to make them as simple as possible. And if you don't want to make one yourself, you can just, download one. There's a lot on the internet, on Maxwell, on other content creators.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I am definitely not making myself a leveling filter. And so thank you very much for coming on and talking with me today, Terek. What do you want to shout out? Anything of yours? Really anything at all, just please don't get me banned. You have the stage.
All right. Thanks for inviting me. So I have my YouTube channel. It's called Terek _Ellie. And I also stream on Twitch, Terek with a 3 at the instead of the E, instead of the second E, I mean. So TER3K. That's it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you there.
See ya.
And so the first thing you should do is go down to the description, head over to Terek's YouTube, give him a big old subscribe, then follow him on Twitch. He has some great content and is super knowledgeable about the game in general. On the other hand, if you're looking for a build guide, the build guides for all of these builds are going to be either up or updated on Maxwell very shortly after the release of this video. Or if you're looking for some video content, then check out my beginner series where I go over a lot of the basics you'll need to know when entering Last Epoch. And so now I'm curious, what build are you going to be starting in Last Epoch 1.0? Is it anything on this list or maybe something else? Do be sure to let me know. And another big thanks to 11th Hour Games for sponsoring this video. You can buy Last Epoch right now using my Nexus, a portion of your purchase will go to supporting the channel, and you'll get to play the awesome ARPG that's just about to release. Personally, I've played Last Epoch for years, and it's only gotten better over time. You could say it's aged like fine wine. But that's all for me today. I'd like to take a minute to thank the patrons and channel members for the continued support, and you might even see some of their names on screen right now. I'd also like to take a minute to thank everyone who made it to the end. I know it's a pretty long video, but I tried to add as much valuable information as I could. I'm very excited to start playing Falcon in Last Epoch, so expect more content on that soon. Good luck with a cycle start, may the servers be stable, and may your drops be plenty.